He's known around the world as the man who brings Jesus to life on screen. But when the cameras stop rolling, Jonathan Roumie walks back into silence. No wife, no children, just a quiet home and a heart full of questions. At 50 years old, adored by millions for his role in The Chosen, Jonathan is still single. But it's not because he isn't kind, or handsome, or spiritual. It's because the road he walks, this path of deep faith and sacred purpose, comes with a hidden cost. And the reason he's still alone will shock you, move you, and maybe even change how you see love, sacrifice, and what it really means to wait for the right person. Jonathan Roumie didn't just land a role when he was cast as Jesus in The Chosen. He stepped into a life-altering mission. Millions of people have cried, prayed, and rediscovered their faith watching his portrayal. But behind the camera, Jonathan's own journey has been much more painful and personal. Because while he plays the savior for the world, he himself is still waiting. For love, for companionship, for someone to come home to. And what most people don't see is that his role as Jesus hasn't just made him famous, it's also made him lonely. He's 50 now. Tall, kind, deeply thoughtful. By all accounts, the kind of man many dream of meeting. But he's still single. Not for lack of offers, not because he avoids relationships, and not because he's hiding some scandalous secret. The truth is far more complex and more spiritual than anyone could guess. Before Barstamo, The Chosen, Jonathan lived like many aspiring actors. He took jobs to survive, made choices based on opportunity, not necessarily values. He dated, he hoped, he searched for meaning. But when The Chosen came into his life, everything changed. Suddenly, his art collided with his faith, and he couldn't look at himself, or love, the same way again. He began to see his role not just as a job, but as a calling, a responsibility. He felt God working through him. And with that spiritual awakening came a painful clarity. The life he used to live, including the way he dated, no longer fit the man he was becoming. He couldn't just look for chemistry anymore. He couldn't just chase affection. He needed something deeper. He needed someone who walked with God as fiercely as he now did. And that's where things got hard, because finding someone who shares your values is already difficult. But finding someone who understands the weight of playing Jesus, the spiritual demands, the emotional toll, that's almost impossible. Jonathan isn't just looking for love. He's looking for a connection grounded in faith, a partnership built not just on attraction, but on spiritual alignment. He wants someone who doesn't just tolerate prayer, but lives it. Someone who doesn't just respect his journey, but is on a similar one herself. And that's where his heartbreak begins. Because while he inspires millions, very few people truly see him. Not the character, not the public figure, but the man. The one who goes home after an exhausting day on set, emotionally drained from portraying sacred moments, and finds nothing but silence. No one to hold, no one to pray with, no one to understand the burden he carries. He has spoken about this in interviews, with painful honesty. He's not angry, he's not bitter, but he is human. And he admits, it hurts. It's hard. It's lonely. And sometimes, it feels like the very role that brought him purpose has also pushed him into isolation. Yet still, he refuses to settle. He has made a vow, not to a person, but to his purpose. He will not compromise his values, even if it means waiting years longer, even if it means watching others find love while he waits alone. Because to Jonathan, love is not just about companionship, it's about covenant, about two people walking toward Christ side by side. And anything less than that isn't worth it. Not anymore. It's easy to assume that fame opens every door, that when millions know your name, love will come knocking. But for Jonathan Roumie, fame has done the opposite. It has built a wall, one that separates him from the very thing he longs for most, a real, grounded, spiritually aligned connection. While the world watches him portray Jesus with soul-stirring emotion, they forget there's a man underneath that beard and robe. A man who goes home after filming and often feels more distant from people than ever before. Because how do you date when the world sees you as holy? How do you open your heart When people can't separate the actor from the role, even fellow believers, the kind of women Jonathan might hope to meet, often approach him with awe, with reverence, with expectations he never asked for. And suddenly, he's not just a man trying to find love, he's a symbol, an icon, and that's a lonely place to stand. Jonathan has talked about this invisible barrier. He said he often feels like people are in love with the idea of him. They admire the character. They admire the mission. But few take the time or have the courage to get to know the real person behind it all. The one with doubts, with vulnerabilities, with heartbreak. Because yes, even the man who plays Jesus has cried over lost love. Even he has prayed late at night, asking God why the right person still hasn't come. He's not looking for perfection, not asking for someone flawless or famous. What he's longing for is understanding. A woman who doesn't get intimidated by his faith, or by the way people look at him. Someone who doesn't try to fit into the role of Jesus' girlfriend, but instead embraces him for who he truly is. Jonathan, the man. Not the role, not the reputation, just him. But that's been hard to find. Not because good people aren't out there, but because the life Jonathan has chosen isn't ordinary. His days are spent in prayer, in deep emotional work, in service to a story that carries spiritual weight. He can't go on casual dates. He can't pretend that love is just about chemistry or fun nights out. For him, love must begin with God. It must be rooted in faith. And that kind of love is rare in a world where relationships are often built on surface-level attraction and fleeting attention. He's also shared that he's had relationships in the past, some meaningful, some not. But as his spiritual life deepened, so did his clarity. He realized that many of those past relationships, though warm and exciting, didn't have the spiritual depth he now needs. They weren't wrong. They just weren't right for the man he's becoming. And so, he let go. Again and again. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Because staying in those relationships would have meant shrinking his soul, compromising his purpose. And Jonathan has already sacrificed too much to go backwards now. This choice to wait, to walk alone, has come at a cost. He has admitted to feeling emotionally exhausted after long days on set, with no one to process it with. No hand to hold, no comforting voice to say, "I understand." He's confessed that there are nights the silence feels unbearable, that some days he wonders if love is truly meant for him at all. But even in those moments, he holds on, because he believes that God doesn't forget those who wait with integrity, that every lonely night, every unanswered prayer, every relationship he turned away from for the sake of faith is not wasted. It's preparation, not punishment. Jonathan is not bitter about his singleness. He doesn't see it as a failure. He sees it as a calling, a refining fire that's shaping him into the man he's meant to be. For the woman who is also being shaped right now, somewhere out there, he believes, is someone walking her own path of faith. Someone who has also said no to compromise. Someone who's also waiting, trusting, praying. And when they meet, it won't be about timing or luck. It will be about destiny, about purpose. That belief keeps him going, through the silence, through the longing, through the ache of watching others find what he's still waiting for. Because he knows, the kind of love he's praying for doesn't come quickly. It comes carefully. And when it does, it will be worth every lonely night. When Jonathan Roumie took on the role of Jesus in The Chosen, he wasn't just stepping into a character, he was stepping into a spiritual mantle, one that would change not only how the world saw him, but how he saw himself. And that transformation, as powerful as it has been for viewers, has come with a cost most people will never see. Because while he's pouring his soul into portraying the Prince of Peace, he's also carrying the quiet sorrow of being alone. Portraying Jesus isn't like any other role. It demands more than memorizing lines or hitting emotional beats. It requires deep spiritual preparation, daily prayer, emotional sacrifice, and a kind of vulnerability that few can truly understand. Jonathan has spoken about how, before filming certain scenes, he fasts, he prays, he asks for God's presence, not just to act, but to serve, to allow himself to become a vessel for something greater. And when the cameras stop rolling, that weight doesn't just disappear. Imagine carrying the emotional energy of Christ's compassion, the agony of betrayal, the pain of rejection, and then going home to silence. No one to debrief with, no one to cry with, no one to say, "That must have been heavy today, let's pray together." That emotional gap, the space between sacred performance and personal loneliness, is one that Jonathan carries every single day. It's no wonder he guards his heart so carefully. When you spend your days immersed in stories of sacrifice, forgiveness, and love beyond understanding, shallow relationships lose their shine. He doesn't want someone who only loves the actor. He wants someone who understands the calling, someone who knows that love isn't always about fireworks and romance. It's about walking through fire together and still choosing to stay. There have been moments, Jonathan admits, where he's questioned his path. Not his faith, but the cost of it. Why would God call him into such a spiritually demanding role and yet allow him to remain alone? Why bring so much light into others' lives through his work, yet leave his own heart yearning in the shadows? But even in those questions, he finds peace, because he knows that God doesn't waste waiting. The seasons of silence, the aching for partnership, the long nights after filming, these are not punishments. They are preparation, a quiet shaping, a holy refining. And this is where Jonathan's story becomes deeply inspiring, even to those who don't follow his faith. Because in a world that rushes love, that fears loneliness, that settles for less, he waits. Not because he can't find someone, but because he refuses to build a love that isn't rooted in truth. His commitment to emotional purity, to spiritual alignment, is rare. And it's beautiful. He has openly talked about this vow, that he will not give his heart to someone who isn't walking toward Christ with him, that he won't start a relationship based on charm or convenience. It must be purpose-driven, spirit-led. Because the work he's doing demands a partner who can hold sacred space with him, not just share a meal or a photo. Jonathan's discipline in love mirrors his discipline in faith. He knows the temptation to settle. He knows the pain of waiting. But he also knows that God has written stories before, and he can write this one too. Many fans hope to see him with someone. They speculate, they wonder, but Jonathan remains still. He trusts. He focuses on his mission. And while the world may only see the glow of the man who plays Jesus, there's a quiet strength in the man beneath it all. A strength forged in waiting, in obedience, in longing. And that strength is a silent testimony, not just to his talent, but to his heart. A heart that still believes in love, that still hopes, that still prays, and that refuses to settle for anything less than a love worthy of the journey he's walked. Because Jonathan Roumie knows, some stories take longer to unfold, not because they're forgotten, but because they're being written with care, with reverence, with destiny. Jonathan Roumie's life is proof that faith doesn't guarantee ease, but it does offer purpose. At 50, he stands at a unique intersection, admired by millions, yet walking a deeply personal journey that many wouldn't trade places with. For some, being single at this age might feel like a missed chance. For Jonathan, it feels like a holy pause, an invitation to trust God's timing over society's pressure. And yet, he's not immune to the ache of waiting. There are days when the silence feels louder than the applause, when the Instagram comments, the interviews, the fan letters all fade into the background, and he's left with a simple, aching prayer. Lord, when is it my turn? That question, honest and raw, has echoed in his heart for years, not out of desperation, but out of hope. Because hope, when stretched over time, doesn't break. It deepens. What makes Jonathan's story remarkable isn't just his talent, it's his surrender. He's not chasing love like the world tells him to. He's not filling the void with fleeting company or temporary thrills. He's waiting in obedience, not because he has to, but because he chooses to. And that choice, to wait with intention, is one of the most courageous acts of faith a man can make. People often look at him and assume he has it all: a successful career, a global platform, a respected name. But the truth is, the thing he desires most cannot be bought, scripted, or staged. It must be chosen, carefully, prayerfully. in alignment with something far greater than emotion or attraction. Jonathan once shared that his ideal partner isn't just someone who believes. She's someone who walks with God, who understands the weight of purpose, who sees his mission not as an obstacle, but as an offering, something they can nurture together. She's not impressed by his fame, but humbled by his heart, not eager to be seen beside him, but willing to pray behind him. And maybe she's out there now, living her own story, facing her own trials, praying the same prayer, God, where is he? And maybe, just maybe, when the time is right, their paths will cross, not through chance, but through divine alignment. Until then, Jonathan continues. He wakes up each day and steps into the role that has changed his life. He serves. He prays. He remains open, not desperate, but ready. Ready for love that is gentle, that is anchored in truth, that doesn't need fixing or proving, only receiving. And that readiness is what sets him apart. Because in a culture that rushes, he waits. In a world that settles, he hopes. And in an industry that often loses itself chasing more, Jonathan has chosen depth. Depth over drama, soul over spotlight, faith over fear. His singleness isn't a wound. It's a witness, a living, breathing testimony that God's timing is never late, even when it feels unbearably slow, that love worth having is love worth waiting for, and that sometimes the greatest stories aren't the ones already told, but the ones still unfolding. So when fans ask why Jonathan Roumie is still single at 50, maybe the real answer is this: because his story isn't finished yet, because God is still writing, because the next chapter isn't delayed, it's being prepared. And when that chapter arrives, it won't just be a love story, it will be a sacred echo of everything Jonathan has lived, waited for, and trusted in. A reward not for being famous, but for being faithful. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who walk alone. Not because they aren't worthy of love, but because they refuse to accept anything less than love that is pure, patient, and real. Jonathan Roumie is one of those people. He's spent years becoming the man he is today, not just the actor who plays Jesus, but the man behind the scenes, whose heart still beats with quiet prayers and silent hopes. While the world watches him on screen, inspired by his performance and moved by his presence, few realize that behind his steady smile lives a longing that doesn't disappear with fame, applause, or recognition, because love, real love, doesn't follow the world's timeline. He could have chosen the easy road, settled long ago, built a relationship for comfort or appearance. But he didn't. And that's the part so many miss. His singleness at 50 isn't a failure. It's a testimony, a story still unfolding in God's hands. You see, sometimes God delays things, not to punish us, but to prepare us, to make our hearts stronger, to deepen our understanding of what truly matters, and to protect us from paths that were never meant for us in the first place. Jonathan knows that. He's waited, and he's still waiting, not with bitterness, but with grace, because he believes somewhere out there, his person is walking her own road, becoming who she needs to be, fighting her own battles, praying her own prayers. And when their paths finally meet, it won't be rushed, it won't be forced, it won't be surface level, it will be the kind of love that can only come from above. A love that sees beyond the actor, beyond the fame, and into the man who dared to wait. That's why his story touches hearts around the world, not because he's perfect, but because he's real, because he shows us that loneliness isn't weakness, and waiting isn't failure. It's courage. Quiet, patient, holy courage. Maybe you're watching this video today with your own questions. Maybe you've waited too. Maybe your heart aches too. And maybe you've wondered if you've been forgotten. But hear this now. You haven't. Just like Jonathan, you are not forgotten. Your story is not over. And the silence in your life is not empty. It's sacred space, a space where God is preparing something beautiful, something better, something lasting. So don't rush the process. Don't settle for less. Wait like Jonathan. Wait with faith. Wait with purpose. Because the story God is writing for you, and for him is still unfolding. And when the page finally turns, when that long-awaited love finally arrives, it will all make sense. Every lonely night, every unanswered prayer, every delay, because love like this doesn't show up fast, it shows up faithful.